My daddy, David, smelled like coffee and newspapers in the morning. I liked that smell. It meant he was home. He worked a lot, at a big building downtown with shiny windows that touched the clouds. Mommy said he had a very important job, and that's why he was always tired, and why his face sometimes looked like a crumpled up piece of paper. I tried to make his face smooth again. I thought if I showed him something really, really good, he would smile a big smile, the kind that reached his eyes. I spent all of recess one Tuesday working on a picture just for him. It was our family, Mommy, me, and him, holding hands under a big, smiling sun. I made Mommy's hair bright yellow, just like the dandelions that popped up in the yard. I gave myself a red dress, my favorite one, with little white dots. For Daddy, I drew him in his blue suit, the important one, but I made sure to give him a happy face, not the crumpled one. The hardest part was the sun. I wanted it to be extra special, so I used my green crayon for its rays. It looked like magic, like the sun was spilling green light all over us, keeping us safe. When he came home that night, I was waiting by the door, my drawing clutched in my hand. The paper was a little sweaty from my fingers. He walked in, dropped his keys in the little wooden bowl, and loosened his tie. "Hi, Chloe Bug," he said, but he was looking at a letter he'd picked up from the mail pile. "Daddy, look!" I held the drawing up for him to see. "I made this for you." He glanced down at it. His eyes scanned it for just a second. "That's nice, sweetie." He started walking toward the kitchen. I followed him, holding the picture higher. "Look, that's you. You're smiling," I said, pointing with my finger. He stopped and looked at it again, a little longer this time. He took a sip of water from the glass he'd just filled. Then he pointed at the top of the page. "Why is the sun green?" he asked. It wasn't a real question. It was the kind of question that already had the answer in it. The answer was, "That's wrong." "It's a magic sun," I explained. "It's shining happy light on us." He let out a little sigh. It was a small sound, but it felt huge. "Chloe, suns are yellow. Everyone knows that. If you're going to draw something, you should try to do it right." He handed the paper back to me. "It's fine, but I'm busy. I have work to do." He walked away, leaving me in the middle of the hallway. I looked down at my picture. The magic green light didn't look like magic anymore. It just looked wrong. My happy family under the wrong-colored sun. I went to my room and put the drawing in the very back of my closet behind my winter boots. I decided I would try harder next time. I would make a new picture with a big, perfect yellow sun, and then he would see. Then he would finally be proud. After the green sun incident, I decided drawing wasn't the way to make Daddy proud. Art had too many opinions. A green sun could be magic to me, but it was just a mistake to him. I needed something that was just right. Something that nobody could say was wrong. Numbers were right. Letters were right. 2 plus 2 was always 4. The word cat was always CAT. There was no magic, just facts. And facts were something Daddy understood. He worked with facts all day in his tall building. So, I started focusing on my schoolwork. My teacher, Mrs. Davison, had a spelling chart on the wall with gold stars next to our names. I wanted more gold stars than anyone. I wanted a whole galaxy of them. We had a spelling test every Friday, and I would practice my words every single night at the kitchen table while Mommy made dinner. I'd spell them out loud to her. COMPUTERBEAUTIFULSCIENCE. Mommy would clap her hands softly and tell me I was the smartest girl she knew. But I wasn't doing it for her. I was doing it for Daddy. I imagined bringing home a test with a big red 100 at the top and him picking me up, spinning me around and saying, "That's my girl, that's my Chloe." My chance came a month later. Our school was having its annual spelling bee for the second graders. Mrs. Davison gave us a long list of words to study, words that were much harder than our Friday tests. Words like sincerely and environment. I studied until the words danced behind my eyes when I tried to sleep. I whispered them to myself on the bus to school and during recess. The day of the spelling bee, my stomach felt like it was full of jumpy frogs. I was one of the last 2 kids on stage. The other kid was a boy named Sam, who always knew the answers in math class. The principal, Mr. Harris, called out my final word, knowledge. I took a deep breath. I could feel all the parents watching me. I saw Mommy in the 3rd row, and she gave me a little wave. Daddy wasn't there. He had a big meeting. He'd promised to be there, but he called that morning to say he couldn't make it. "You'll do fine, Chloe Bug," he'd said over the phone. "Just don't misspell anything." I gripped the microphone. "Knowledge," I said clearly. Knowledge. Knowledge. The auditorium was quiet for a second, and then everyone started clapping. Sam had misspelled his word, which meant I had won. I won. Mr. Harris handed me a big blue ribbon that said first place. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I practically vibrated with excitement all the way home. I couldn't wait to show Daddy. Not just the ribbon, but the fact of it. I had won. I was the best speller. There was no opinion about it. It was a fact. When he got home that night, I was waiting for him. The blue ribbon clutched in my hand. It was just like with the drawing, but this time it was going to be different. Daddy! Daddy, I won! I shouted, running to him and holding up the ribbon. He took it from my hand and looked at it. A small smile appeared on his face. Hey, look at that! First place! Good job, sweetie. He handed it back to me. I spelled knowledge to win, I said, my chest puffing out with pride. Knowledge, huh? That's a tricky one, he said, already walking past me toward his home office, shrugging off his jacket. Lots of silent letters. Did you hesitate on the K? My smile faltered. What? Did you pause? Sometimes when kids aren't sure, they hesitate before the first letter. You have to be confident. Always be confident. He opened the door to his office, the one I wasn't allowed to go into when he was working. This is great, Chloe, but the spelling bees get a lot harder in 3rd grade. The words get much longer. You'll have to study even more if you want to win again next year. And then he closed the door. I stood there alone in the hallway, the blue ribbon feeling flimsy and small in my hand. It wasn't a fact I had won. It was just a warning that I had to try even harder. If art was wrong and winning wasn't enough, then maybe the problem was me. Maybe I wasn't just doing the wrong things. Maybe I wasn't the right kind of person. Daddy was strong. He didn't cry, and he walked with big, fast steps, like he always knew exactly where he was going. I was small, and I cried when I scraped my knee. Maybe I needed to be strong too. On Saturdays, Daddy sometimes watched sports on the big TV in the living room. He would shout at the screen things like, "Come on, faster!" or, "What a terrible play." He never shouted about spelling bees, so I decided I would do a sport. I chose swimming. Water was quiet, and once you were under, you couldn't hear anyone talking. It felt like a good place to be strong. The first few weeks were awful. The water was always cold, and it felt like 1,000 icy needles poking my skin. I hated putting my face in, and I'd come up sputtering, my eyes stinging from the chlorine. The coach, a kind woman named Maria, would tell me to relax, to trust the water. The water will hold you up if you let it, she'd say. I didn't believe her. I thrashed and kicked, fighting it every second, trying to force it to hold me up. Daddy found out I had joined the swim team when he saw my wet towel on the floor. "Swimming?" he said, picking it up. "That's a tough sport, demanding. You need a lot of stamina." It was the most he had said about any of my activities. A little flame of hope flickered in my chest. He started coming to my practices. He wouldn't sit with the other parents on the bleachers. He would stand at the far end of the pool by himself, with his arms crossed over his chest. I could feel his eyes on me with every stroke. After practice, on the car ride home, he would give me notes. "Your turn at the wall is too slow, Chloe. You're losing at least 2 seconds there. You have to be explosive. You're lifting your head too high to breathe. Be sleek, like a torpedo. Your kicks are lazy. Are you even trying?" I tried. I tried so hard. I kicked until my legs ached. I practiced my turns until my fingers were raw from hitting the wall. I learned to be sleek. I learned to trust the water. I wasn't fighting it anymore. I was cutting through it. Coach Maria said I was one of her most improved swimmers. And then, she told me I was going to swim a leg in the 200-meter freestyle relay at the regional junior meet. I told Daddy, expecting him to be excited. "The relay?" he said, frowning. "That means you're dependent on other people. A team is only as strong as its weakest link. Don't be the weakest link, Chloe." The day of the meet, the air in the natatorium was thick and smelled like chlorine and hot dogs. The sound of the starting buzzer and the splashing water was deafening. I saw Daddy in the stands right in the front row. He wasn't smiling. He was just watching. His face crumpled like it was on a workday. I was the 3rd swimmer on my team. When my teammate touched the wall, I dove in. For 50 meters, the world disappeared. There was no noise, no Daddy, no winning or losing. There was just the water, the black line on the bottom of the pool, and the burn in my muscles. I kicked as hard as I could. I kept my head down. I was a torpedo. When I touched the wall, I came up for air, gasping. My team finished in 2nd place. We got silver medals that hung on thick blue ribbons, just like my spelling bee one. I felt a surge of pride. We did it. I wasn't the weakest link. I found Daddy by the concession stand. He was stirring a cup of coffee. I got a medal, Daddy, I said, holding up the silver circle for him to see. He didn't take it. He just nodded. I saw, he said. You were late on the dive. The girl in lane 4 was in the water a full second before you, and your final 10 meters were sloppy. You got tired. You can't get tired, Chloe. The end of the race is when it counts the most. Second place is fine, I guess, but you didn't win. He took a sip of his coffee. Let's go home. You have practice on Monday. You need to work on your endurance. I followed him out of the loud, steamy building, the silver medal bouncing against my chest. It felt cold and heavy. It felt like a failure. It wasn't a fact I was strong. It was just proof that I wasn't strong enough. The silver medal went into the back of the closet, right next to the drawing of the green sun. They were becoming a collection of things that were almost good enough. I stopped asking Daddy to come to my swim meets after that. I still swam because Coach Maria was nice, and I liked the quiet of the water, but I didn't try to be a torpedo anymore. I just swam. I didn't care if my turns were slow. It didn't matter. I started watching Daddy more closely. I realized his most important moments happened in his office. He would close the door, and I would hear his voice, low and serious. Sometimes I would peek through the crack in the door. I saw him with stacks and stacks of paper, all covered in neat black lines and numbers. This was his world. It wasn't about being strong or smart. It was about being organized, tidy, everything in its right place. My room was always a mess. My toys were everywhere. My books were in crooked piles. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe if I could be organized, like him, he would see that I was like him. One Thursday evening, he was more stressed than I had ever seen him. His face was extra crumpled. He was on the phone, pacing back and forth in the living room. Yes, I know. It will be on your desk in the morning. The final report. I just need to collate the data sheets. He hung up and rubbed his eyes. He left his big leather briefcase on the floor by the couch and went into the kitchen to get some coffee. This was my chance. Collate the data sheets. I didn't know what collate meant, but I knew what sheets were. I looked in his briefcase. It was full of papers. Some had big charts on them, and others were just covered in words. It looked messy, not organized at all. I decided to help him. I carefully took all the papers out of the briefcase and laid them on the floor. I made 2 piles, a pictures pile for the charts and a words pile for the others. That seemed more organized. As I was making the piles, I accidentally knocked over my little cup of apple juice that was on the coffee table. A small puddle landed right on top of one of the words pages. I gasped. I grabbed a napkin and tried to wipe it off, but it just smeared the ink, making a big gray smudge. Panic set in. I tried to put all the papers back in the briefcase as fast as I could, but my hands were shaking. I just shoved them all back inside. The pictures and the words all mixed up now, the smudged page hidden somewhere in the middle. I closed the briefcase and pushed it back to the exact spot where he had left it. The next morning, he was in a rush. He grabbed the briefcase, gave Mommy a quick kiss, and patted my head without really looking at me. "Be good, Chloe Bug," he said, and then he was gone. The quiet in the house after he left felt different that day. It felt heavy. When he came home that night, the front door opened so slowly. He didn't drop his keys in the bowl. He walked into the living room where I was sitting, watching cartoons. He was holding the smudged paper in his hand. His face wasn't crumpled, it was blank, and that was so much scarier. "Chloe," he said, and his voice was so quiet I barely heard it. "Did you go into my briefcase last night?" I looked at the floor. "I was trying to help," I whispered. "I was organizing it for you." "Organizing it?" He held up the paper. "This is a page from the final projections report." Or it was. This, and about 50 other pages, were completely out of order. I went into the most important meeting of the year with a stack of nonsense. I looked like an idiot. Mommy came in from the kitchen. "David, what's wrong?" She was just trying to be helpful. Daddy looked at her, and then he looked back at me. It was like he was looking right through me. "Helpful?" he said, and he let out a laugh that had no happiness in it. "That's the problem. She's always trying. She tries to draw, and she gets the colors wrong. She tries to spell, and she wins one little ribbon. She tries to swim, and she comes in second place. Nothing is ever just right. It's always just a little bit off." He knelt down in front of me. I thought he was going to hug me, but he just looked at me, his eyes tired and sad. "Don't you see, Chloe? It's never enough." He stood up and walked away to his office, closing the door behind him. He didn't shout it. He said it like a fact. Like the sun being yellow. Like 2 plus 2 being 4. It's never enough. And in that moment, sitting on the floor with the sound of cartoons still playing, I understood. The goal wasn't to win a race or a spelling bee. The goal was to be enough. And I couldn't be. He had just told me. So I stopped trying. Stopping wasn't like flipping a switch. It was more like a slow leak. The air just went out of me little by little. At first, I didn't know what to do with myself. All my time had been spent trying to draw the perfect picture, trying to learn the hardest words, trying to swim the fastest lap. Now that time was just there. A big, empty space. The next Friday, Mrs. Davison gave us our spelling test. I hadn't studied the list at all. I just sat at my desk, filled in the words I knew, and made guesses on the ones I didn't. When she handed it back to me, there was a big 75 written in red at the top. The old me would have been crushed. The old me would have hidden the paper in shame. But I just looked at it, folded it neatly, and put it in my backpack. It was a fact. It wasn't a good fact or a bad fact. It was just a 75. At swim practice, I told Coach Maria that I didn't want to be in the relay anymore. "Are you sure, Chloe?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "You're one of my strongest swimmers." "I just want to swim," I said. "Not race." She looked at me for a long moment, and then she nodded. "Okay, just swim." And so I did. During the time the competitive team was practicing dives and turns, I went to the other side of the pool. I would float on my back, my ears just under the surface, so the whole world went quiet and muffled. I'd look up at the high ceiling of the natatorium, at the metal beams and the big dusty lights. The water held me up. Coach Maria was right all along. It wasn't something you had to fight. It just held you. I spent the rest of the season floating. The strangest part was what happened at home. The house became quieter. The space between me and Daddy grew wider. I no longer waited by the door for him. I didn't have anything to show him. When he came home, I would say hi from the living room, my eyes still on my book or the TV. He'd say, "Hi, Chloe Bug," and walk on by. There were no more crumpled paper faces, because I wasn't giving him anything to crumple about. I wasn't a problem to be solved anymore. I was just there. Mommy noticed. "You seem happier, honey," she said to me one afternoon. We were in the garden, and she was teaching me the names of the flowers. I thought about it. Was I happier? I wasn't excited. I wasn't proud. But the tight, jumpy feeling in my stomach was gone. "I guess so," I said. She tried to talk to Daddy about it. I heard them one night, when they thought I was asleep. "She quit the swim team," Mommy said. Her voice was soft. "She didn't quit," Daddy's voice replied. "She's still on the roster. She just doesn't want to compete. And her grades are slipping. David, did you see her last report card?" "I saw it. It was fine. B's and C's are average. She's average." I expected him to sound angry or disappointed, but he just sounded tired, like he was talking about the weather. "Don't you care?" Mommy asked. There was a long pause. "Of course I care," he said, but his voice was distant. "I'm just busy. I've got that big merger project. It's all-consuming. She's fine. She's a kid." But I wasn't fine. Not really. I was just quiet. I had learned that my best wasn't good enough, so I had decided to not have a best. I lived in the land of fine and average. It was a safe place. There were no high scores, but there were no failures either. There was no praise, but there was no criticism. In the land of average, no one ever told you that you weren't enough. They just didn't notice you at all. And I learned that being invisible was a lot less painful than being a disappointment. I disappeared right in front of his eyes, and he never even saw me go. The weeks that followed were all painted in the same shade of gray. Not a sad gray, just a quiet, unbothered gray. I did my homework, but I didn't check it twice. I swam my laps, but I never raced the clock. I was a ghost in my own life, and it was peaceful. The constant buzzing pressure to be more, to be better, had finally gone silent. For the first time, there was no next big thing I had to conquer. There was just today. One Saturday, a storm rolled in, trapping us inside. The rain tapped against my bedroom window like 100 tiny fingers. I had read all my library books and was tired of my toys. I found myself looking in my closet, digging for an old board game, when my hand brushed against something familiar. It was the shoebox where I had hidden my failures. I pulled it out and sat on the floor. I took out the drawing of the family under the green sun, and then the second-place silver medal. I looked at them, not as painful reminders, but as artifacts from a different time, from a different girl. The girl who thought her dad's pride was a prize she could win. She seemed so young and so tired. On a whim, I pulled out my box of crayons. The wax felt smooth under my fingers. I didn't plan to draw anything for anyone. I just wanted to see the colors. I started with blue, making big, swooping circles. Then I added yellow stars inside the blue circles. I drew our house, but I gave it big, feathery wings. I drew a tree whose leaves were tiny orange hearts. I was lost in it. The world outside my paper disappeared. I wasn't trying to be right. I was just making things. I wasn't being an artist. I was just being Chloe. I don't know how long I was there on the floor, humming to myself. But when I looked up, Daddy was standing in my doorway. He wasn't saying anything. He was just watching me. My first instinct was to hide my drawing, to shield the heartleaf tree and the winged house from his gaze. But then I remembered. It didn't matter. His opinion wasn't the sun I orbited anymore. I had stopped trying to make him proud. So I just looked back at him, and then went back to coloring in one of the hearts. He was quiet for a long time. I could feel him looking, not just at the chaos of impossible colors on the paper, but at me. He saw the old drawing of the family on the floor beside me. He saw the silver medal lying on top of it. He saw the new drawing in my hands, the one that wasn't for him, the one that broke all the rules. He walked into the room, his footsteps soft on the carpet. He didn't say my colors were wrong. He didn't say my house couldn't fly. He just sat down on the floor across from me. He looked so big and out of place among my dolls and books. His eyes fell on the old drawing, the one he had dismissed so easily. I watched his face. For the first time in a long, long time, it wasn't crumpled with stress or blank with exhaustion. It looked sad. He looked at the drawing of the smiling stick figure family under the magical green sun, and I think for the first time, he didn't see a mistake. I think he saw a message. A message from a little girl who just wanted her family to be happy. A message he had returned unopened. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were shiny. "Chloe," he said. His voice was just a whisper. He pointed a finger, not at the old drawing, but at the new one in my lap. "Tell me about that one." I stopped coloring. It was a new kind of question. It wasn't a test. It was an invitation. He wasn't asking if it was right. He was just asking. I hesitated, then lifted the paper. A small smile, a real one, found its way to my lips. "Well," I started, "this is our house. It can fly anywhere we want to go. And this isn't rain outside. It's lemonade." He didn't fix my facts. He didn't correct my science. He just nodded slowly and listened. He didn't say he was proud of me. He didn't have to. In that quiet moment, on the floor of my bedroom with the rain tapping on the window, he wasn't my judge anymore. He was just my daddy, finally asking to see the